we come on the air, senators have been getting their final shot to question Supreme Court nominee Ketanji Brown Jackson. And you saw some of it there. Republicans keeping it contentious on abortion, on child porn sentences, on court packing. We're going to break down some of the most tense moments we've seen today. Plus, the formal accusation by the U.S. that Russia's committing war crimes as the fighting in Ukraine devastates two big cities there. President Biden, he just touched down in Brussels ahead of tomorrow's emergency NATO meeting. We're live with what he plans to do this week. And look at this, Louisiana under a state of emergency after two tornadoes last night in New Orleans. We've got the latest forecast with millions still in the way of the path of this horrific storm. That's later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and after 2 days, 20 hours, and hundreds of questions, President Biden's pick for the Supreme Court is just about done with the public part of her confirmation process. There's a couple more senators to go, and then after that, Judge Jackson goes behind closed doors for more questions about her FBI background check. Now, that's standard, right? But what we've seen so far has had some Democrats, in their words, distressed, with some Republicans in really sharp exchanges over topics like the judge's child sex abuse image sentencing, abortion, and adding justices to the court, getting so tense at some points that lawmakers just argued with each other instead of asking her questions. Watch.
Why did you choose to sentence Hess to the absolute lowest possible sentence you were allowed to sentence under law? I
have spoken at length throughout this hearing about these cases.
I know you want to interrupt. I know you don't like this line of questioning.
I just want you to play by the rules. Yes. Comes a point, Senator, where you get a little bit...
Chairman Durbin, will you allow her to answer the question?
You won't allow her to answer.
Did I understand that right? You have an opinion on court packing?
Senator, I have a lot of opinions. In my view, it is not appropriate for me to comment is because of my fidelity to the judicial role.
So there's no suggestion that after 20 weeks that a child can live independently, correct?
I'm not a biologist. I haven't studied this. No, Senator, I didn't say versus.
That's exactly what you said.
You gave him 3 months. My question is, do you regret it or not?
I regret is that in a hearing about my qualifications to be a justice on the Supreme Court, we've spent a lot of time focusing on this small subset of my sentences.
She is choosing her words carefully there, obviously. You saw Democrats trying to help shore her up, praising her temperament, defending her record. With the Senate's longest tenured member, Patrick Leahy of Vermont, very clear about his frustration with how this whole thing has played out. Watch.
I'm just distressed to see this kind of a complete breakdown of what's normally the way the Senate's handled.
I want to bring in now Allie Vitale, who is live for us on Capitol Hill, and Pete Williams in our Washington bureau. Pete, let me start with you. Tell me about your takeaways for today and where we go next from here, because we did see, listen, these spicy questions from some of these Republicans, despite concern from Democrats that this was, not particularly relevant to the point of the hearing here.
Well, it has pointed up a policy question about the sentencing process for offenders who gather child pornographic images. And what Judge Jackson has said here is that the sentencing guidelines were set up to look at people who acquired them before the internet. When you had to find some guy wearing a raincoat on the corner or order them by mail or take some extraordinary lengths to get these horrible images. That was considered more serious than someone who just downloaded them with a single click of a computer mouse. But the feeling of most federal judges, including Judge Jackson, is that the sentencing guidelines didn't take that into account. What some of the Republicans are saying, and this was perhaps most clearly expressed by Lindsey Graham, is maybe that's wrong. Maybe that's the wrong policy. Maybe because computers and the internet can gather so many more of these images, that should be considered the more serious offense and should get more serious prison time. If that's the case, that should be a change in policy. What Judge Jackson was talking about was the current policy and the current disparities that she faced as a judge. I will say one other thing, Hallie. I think, the senators are talking now about getting these pre-sentence reports that would go into more detail about the nature of the offenders. And perhaps that would help them understand her sentencing more. What they do already have is the length of time that the probation office recommended. But they can get a lot of this information just by reading the sentencing recommendations of the government and the defense lawyers in these cases, which are public documents, and they go into a lot of detail about what happened.
Hallie, let me go to you and play a little mood music for us here, right? Because we know that the White House had largely anticipated this. You have to assume that Judge Jackson was prepared for some of these lines of questioning here. What was it like in the room, and what do we expect over the next 24 hours or so?
Well, look, during those tense moments that you played, it got really awkward. We saw the same thing yesterday when Lindsey Graham began his line of questioning, and then the same thing happened today. That clip that you played of Patrick Leahy coming out to the cameras, he was talking to me. He came to our camera right out of the hearing room, maybe took 8 steps, and immediately started talking about the way that he was distressed about the way that the Senate is being perceived and is acting in this moment. It was really a larger statement about the institution as a whole. I asked him, too, okay, what's the actual impact, though? There are the fireworks moments, but does this change anything in terms of her getting voted out of committee and then ultimately voted on by the full Senate? You and I and Pete all know the political reality here, which is that Democrats have control of the Senate body. All they need is Vice President Kamala Harris to make this confirmation a reality. It's why Senator Leahy said, no, ultimately it doesn't impact the bottom line. His concern, though, is about the face of politics on the institution at this moment, and he called Lindsey Graham's questions, for instance, out of line and beyond the pale. That was why he was so angry here when he came out. Things only got worse when you then got into Senator Ted Cruz and his heated line of questioning. There was a lot of back and forth with Senator Dick Durbin trying to get that moment under control. Ultimately, it sort of became clear to the Democratic senators in that room that the questions Cruz was asking, although he wanted answers from the judge, he wasn't willing to really stop talking long enough to let her do the answering of those questions. That was, again, very heated, very tense. It's why you do prep for these moments, but these are also sort of the things that you can only prep so much. You can't predict how these senators are actually going to go through these lines of questioning. I would also add, though, Hallie, we caught up with Senator Lindsey Graham in the hallway here. He said he knew that he was answering or asking questions that were inappropriate, but that he did it because the judge wouldn't answer his questions. So I'm not sure that that's an explanation necessarily, but that's his line of reasoning that he said to us here.
You mentioned that interaction with Senator Cruz, and that did elicit a piece of news on a different topic, Pete, which is when Senator Cruz was asking her about a pretty hot-button case that's coming in front of the Supreme Court as it relates to Harvard and affirmative action, and the judge saying that it is her plan to recuse herself from that, which is really the first time we've heard of that. Remind us of what that case entails. Give us the backstory there and why this is significant.
Right. This is a challenge brought by Asian American students who claim that Harvard's admission process discriminates against them, puts them at a disadvantage compared to other minority students. And the Supreme Court agreed to take this case, and we'll hear it next term. Now, if she is on the Supreme Court, the question was, would she recuse? And she said today, yes, she would take herself off that case because she's on a board that advises Harvard on policy. So she wouldn't be there. That would obviously deprive Harvard of a potential vote for its side. So it's a big deal. And, of course, her entire career of recusals has been a pretty strict one. She's often recuses whenever there are potential questions about her fairness or impartiality. But the thing about being a district court judge or an appeals court judge is that there are other judges who can take your place. That's not true on the Supreme Court, and that's why Supreme Court justices oftentimes recuse less often. But nonetheless, she's now made this position. What she said is that is her plan. And, of course, I assume she would stick with it if she gets confirmed.
Hallie, she has been through now. We are wrapping up tonight, you know, the running of the gauntlet, if you will, with this public Q&A portion from members of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There will be some outside witnesses that will speak. But walk us through the timeline from there, keeping in mind that if Judge Jackson is confirmed as a justice, she would not, as Pete knows well, change the ideological makeup of the Supreme Court. It is widely anticipated she would get enough Democratic votes, with 50 Democrats plus Vice President Harris in a tie-breaking role. How soon could we see that happen and her confirmation to be finished, if you will?
Look, the goal, Hallie, from Chairman Dick Durbin has been they want to do this before April 8th, before the Senate goes on an Easter recess of sorts. They could do that on this timeline. It seems like everything is going to continue going according to plan today. They're not, at this point, seeming to stop for these pretrial documents and sentencing documents that Republicans are trying to push for. So we've still got a few senators left to go today. Then the outside validators and experts come tomorrow. And then that means what we have to wait and see is when the Judiciary Committee ultimately schedules a vote to put Ketanji Brown Jackson out of committee. Should they vote her out of committee, then, of course, the full Senate votes for her. And it's the political stakes that you laid out from there. That could take a little bit of time. At the same time, though, I could see them doing this on the schedule that they laid out. Yeah. And in terms of bipartisanship, Chairman Dick Durbin keeps saying hope springs eternal. So we'll see where that lands.
And Pete, super quick, it's not like she then heads over to the Supreme Court and takes her job, end of April, right? She waits until Justice Breyer officially steps down.
No, there's no vacancy yet. Right. And Justice Breyer has said he's not going to step down till the end of June or early July when all the decisions have been handed down. So she'll be in the bullpen if she's confirmed.
Pete Williams, Allie Vitale, thank you both very much on what I know have been a long couple days for the both of you. Appreciate it. Turning now to what's happening overseas. President Biden, look at him. This is him coming off Air Force One in Brussels just within about the last hour or so. And it's coming at this incredibly significant moment when we talk about the crisis in Ukraine. The U.S. is now formally accusing Russia of war crimes there, as you've got the president prepping for this. Listen, it's a cliche to call it a high-stakes meeting, but that is what it is. They don't call it an extraordinary summit for nothing. You have Secretary of State Tony Blinken today saying that every day that Russia's forces keep up their brutal attacks, the number of innocent civilians killed and wounded, including women and children, climbs. And he added the U.S. government assesses members of Russia's forces have committed war crimes in Ukraine. So the president is landing in Brussels. You see that shot. Here's what's on the agenda. First, more sanctions for Russia, sending 4 new battle groups to NATO's eastern flank, talking about the possibility of Russia using nuclear or chemical weapons. And fourth, the president may announce more permanent U.S. troops in NATO countries near Ukraine, keeping those troops in the region just in case. What's not on the agenda? Ukraine actually becoming a member of NATO. That is something the Ukrainian president, Zelensky, is expected to ask for when he talks with these leaders virtually tomorrow. Kelly O'Donnell joins us now to tee up what is going to be, Kelly, a really significant 18 hours for President Biden and for these leaders on the world stage here.
And in one of the places where words really matter, it's in the diplomatic realm. So when you talk about extraordinary session or high stakes, that actually matters when you're talking about the world of diplomacy, where they measure in syllables things that can have echoes across the globe. So this is high stakes, and it is important. And NATO never permits a new country to enter when it's in a conflict. So that is off the table. And it is also off the table in the sense that it is the kind of the remarkable circumstance that prompted Russia to invade, as kind of inexplicable as that is. But what President Biden will have a chance to do tonight, now that he's on the ground here, he's going to spend the night at what amounts to the ambassador's residence here in Belgium, is to prep for his meeting with 30 other nations who are members of NATO. They will have meetings in private tomorrow. They will hear from President Zelensky appearing virtually. We've seen him do that, speaking to our U.S. Congress and to other legislative bodies around the world, speaking to his own constituents in Ukraine and speaking out to the global community. So expect him to pull no punches when he does that. There have been times when he has been very direct in asking what he needs, what he wants, knowing that at times there will be disagreements among leaders or different perspectives about what is achievable, what is doable. He has asked for the no-fly zone that NATO members have not been willing to do, but he's also asked for other aggressive means to try to defend his homeland, and there has been progress there. So part of what makes this an extraordinary session is the leaders who've come together have already done a number of things with sanctions, with financial restrictions on Russia, with aid to refugees who are pouring out of Ukraine, with humanitarian aid, and with military supplies. What more can they do? And they don't want to get together for a meeting like this and display any divisions. So being able to meet and agree agree on new things that are substantial, that are meaningful, they believe, at this 1-month mark of this war. That's all very important. And wanting to show Russia here in Europe, closer to the area of the conflict, that they are united is important. So all of those things in words, in actions, and in the demonstrations that they make will be important to try to send Vladimir Putin a message. He speaks that language. He's been a part of that diplomatic world. He's isolated from it now, but he would understand those important signals, Hallie.
Kelly, I'm getting over to our Gabe Gutierrez, who is in Ukraine in a second, but I have to, listen, President Zelensky, I'm particularly interested in looking at his address to these NATO leaders tomorrow. He has done a lot of work in tailoring his message to each of the countries, each of the lawmaking bodies that he's spoken to. I'm curious to see how he will tailor his message to this group of leaders, considering he has consistently been asking for the same kind of thing, right? He wants a no-fly zone. I think he understands he's not going to get that from the U.S., at least not at this point. What will you be listening for? What should we be listening for in the next 30 seconds while I have you?
Well, one of the questions is, will we be able to hear it at all? At this point, this is a closed session. So as much as Volodymyr Zelensky has been very much a man of the moment and using the tools of modern communication, and his addresses have been shared widely, which has helped to galvanize the public broadly around the world to understand what his people are going through and what he is asking for. We may not know the specifics, and we are pressing for access to that through NATO, through the United States, and certainly through Ukrainian officials. So perhaps after the fact, we'll get some idea of what he said. Perhaps there will be some kind of coverage. So at this point, that's question number one. But one of the things we've seen him do is take elements of speeches or rhetoric that has been important to each country. How he would do that for 30 nations would be more difficult, but he could certainly go to the history of NATO itself and what has been so important, as this has been an organization that has kept a world order and peace for decades, and what's at stake here. And that is critical for what Zelensky can do. And he has not been shy about pushing the boundaries of asking for things that he needs, even when he knows leaders aren't prepared to go that far just yet. Hallie?
Kelly O'Donnell, live for us in Brussels. Kelly, I'm sure we'll be talking to you again tomorrow. Appreciate it. Let's talk about what's happening on the ground now in Ukraine, because today a NATO official is estimating that somewhere between 7,000 and 15,000 Russian troops have died so far in this war on Ukraine. It's coming as these top security officials in Kyiv say Ukrainian troops are actually trying to take back these chunks of territory, and they're doing it. They're taking back some of this territory from Russia. They don't think Kyiv, look at this map, they don't think Kyiv right in the center there is under imminent, quote unquote, threat at the moment. But what we're seeing around Kyiv is not what's happening in other places like Chernihiv in the upper part of the map. You see it there, and then Mariupol in the bottom right. Today, the governor of Chernihiv is saying Russia bombed and destroyed a key bridge that connected their city to Kyiv overnight. And then in Mariupol, which was down in the south that we showed you, that has been incredibly hard hit. President Zelensky today saying almost 100,000 people are trapped there. They have no food. They have no water. They are totally circled by Russian troops right now, troops that have been bombarding the city with airstrikes for days. Gabe Gutierrez joins me now. And Gabe, in some ways, it's a tale of one country, two stories, right? On the one hand, Ukrainian resistance in some of these key areas, trying to take back territory from Russian troops and having some limited success. On the other hand, Russia absolutely pounding, for example, Mariupol, which we've talked about, showing absolutely no sign of letting up.
Yeah, that's right, Hallie. The situation in Mariupol is getting even more dire. We're now hearing reports from that city. It only has one functioning hospital, and now they are, continuing to treat patients by candlelight in the basement. So an increasingly dire situation in Mariupol, as we have been reporting. That's, of course, a southeastern port city. But as you said, Ukrainian troops trying to claw back some of the territory around Kyiv, and according to the Ukrainians, they have been successful in one of those Kyiv suburbs, Hallie.
One of the questions that's going to come up, and we heard this with Kelly a little bit, Gabe, with President Biden at this summit here, is the threat of potential use of chemical weapons on Russia's part. We heard the Kremlin tell CNN they'd only use nuclear weapons if the existence of the country was under threat, which, by the way, has kind of been the line from Russia, I think, all along. But talk a little bit about how much Ukraine is preparing for the possibility of, for example, chemical warfare here.
You know, Hallie, in terms of a nuclear threat, President Zelensky has repeatedly said that this is just bluster from the Russians. But President Zelensky has, been repeatedly asking for more assistance, for more weapons from NATO, from the U.S. And, the idea of a no-fly zone, as you well know, Hallie, probably isn't going to happen. But it's something we keep hearing from Ukrainians, from the refugees that we've been speaking with repeatedly want, something they keep repeating to me is close the skies. And, the Ukrainian military has been making a very valiant effort on the ground. They just, feel that they need that they need more help. But Ukrainian authorities have said that, Russia is capable of anything. I just spoke with the deputy prime minister a few days ago. She said it was a very real threat, and she wanted to keep the world aware that Vladimir Putin, in her view, was capable of anything. And, the United States coming out today and officially calling what Russia is doing in parts of Ukraine war crimes. This is something that we have been hearing from the Ukrainian officials already for several weeks, since very early on in this invasion, Hallie.
Can I ask you a question, Gabe? You've been there, you've been on the ground. What is something that we're not talking about enough, do you think? What is a storyline that you have identified there on the ground that you think is not getting enough attention on the world stage?
Well, several weeks ago, it was the stories we were hearing from Mariupol, but that, of course, has been getting a lot of attention. Today I found it interesting when I was speaking with some of the volunteers here in Lviv, and something that did surprise me is this idea that they were so short on basic medical supplies. That the Ukrainian army, we keep talking about the valiant effort they are putting up, but Hallie, the sheer power of the Russian military, they're just outgunned. And yes, they have been able to hold the line so far throughout much of the country, but they are short basic medical supplies. Tourniquets, for example. We were speaking with some volunteers here. They just don't have a basic wartime supplies such as tourniquets. And of course, that suggests you only really need a tourniquet if you're suffering a serious injury. And they don't have those on the front lines. They don't have the supplies they need because they are just, overwhelmed. And I think as this war drags on, even though there are these reports of the Russian military stalling and, lacking basic supplies and even cold weather gear, the Ukrainian military can only last so much if this war drags on for weeks and months, and they're already starting to see shortages of basic medical supplies. So, that also needs to be discussed, that while they are mounting this very valiant effort, it is, an uphill battle by far, and it's something that the world, NATO, will have to consider. What happens when the supplies run out, and what happens if the Ukrainians just can't get up that hill any longer? What then, Hallie?
Gabe Gutierrez, I'm glad you're there. I know it's been a long, tough stretch. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure I'll be chatting with you more tomorrow as we have special coverage, of course, of President Biden's visit to Brussels right here on NBC News Now. Back here at home, just in the last few hours, you had the Louisiana governor saying he is thankful the damage from 2 tornadoes that ripped through New Orleans weren't worse, even though he still declared a state of emergency to help people basically get back up on their feet. The Louisiana National Guard and the governor, they are there on the ground right now. They're looking at all the damage, deadly damage, right? 1 person was killed, 8 people were hurt, according to the governor. And these storms, man, they ripped in overnight. They flipped cars. Look at this. They ripped roofs off homes. More than 2,000 people still don't have power. Luckily, by 11 o'clock tonight, most people should have it back on. Check out where the tornadoes touched down in New Orleans East and Lacombe, causing the most damage in St. Bernard Parish. As the storm touched down, our affiliate WDSU was taking it all in live, warning viewers to take cover. Watch.
There it is. You can see it. Okay, folks, get to your safe place.
It is so scary to watch. I'm sure it was even scarier to live through. Morgan Chesky is on the ground in New Orleans. Morgan, good evening. Good to see you. Tell us what you're seeing and hearing.
It's a tough scene, Hallie, and unfortunately, it's a scene that we've seen all too much this week as this string of storms has moved really across the South, striking Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, parts of Mississippi as well, in addition to other smaller communities, simply because this is that time of year, unfortunately, and we had a chance to walk through a hard-hit neighborhood here in St. Bernard Parish, and it always is striking, but especially here, how one home can have everything torn apart, and essentially the house across the street looks like it hasn't even been touched. There's a very clear scar left in a neighborhood here, and even though we were walking through just what seems like a few hours after these tornadoes struck, it really was remarkable to see just how many people were out and about picking up the pieces of what was left behind. I had a chance to speak to one woman who lost her home in Hurricane Katrina, lost her roof in Hurricane Ida, and now she has suffered some damage as a result of last night's storm. And here's what she had to say about the road ahead. Take a listen.
You've picked up the pieces.
Yeah.
You've had to pick up the pieces before, and now again.
But you know what? Life's a puzzle, and you just constantly have to put those pieces back together. It's the only way you're going to make anything pretty.
You really have to respect her optimism despite the damage that we've witnessed today. I did have a chance to speak with officials who say about 41 homes were destroyed as a result of this, about 100 other structures in the St. Bernard Parish area. They're still doing their assessments, however, but really just a tough blow for this community because they know that hurricane season is not too far down the road either,
right.
Hallie.
That's coming up soon. Hey, Morgan, real quick, what's behind you? It looks like you're at a recovery center. Is that right? Like, are people handing out supplies there?
This has actually been kind of the main command post for the overwhelming amount of law enforcement and first responders that have descended on this scene. We've seen them kind of going through, making sure, of course, that everyone's been accounted for. And this has kind of been the main area in which they've sent directives out to various neighborhoods that have been struck by the storm. It's been a hive of activity all day long, in addition to the volunteers that have been going through the neighborhoods as well.
Morgan Chesky, we're glad to have you there in New Orleans. Thank you for bringing us those stories. Appreciate it. And here's the thing, gang. Here's the scary part. This bad weather is not over yet. 23 million people are under risk for severe storms for the third day in a row. Michelle Grossman is here. So where should we be looking, Michelle? What areas of the country are you going to be watching into these overnight hours?
Hi there, Hallie. Yeah, I know. Can you believe it? We had 48 hours of wild weather. We're watching it still at this hour through tonight. And then we have another day that we're going to be watching the potential for severe weather. So as we look at radar, you can see it's a broad area of where we're seeing severe storms right now. Some in the south and also some in the Ohio Valley. So it's a long trailing cold front. We even have some snow, some spring snow on the backside. But I zoomed in here for you because I wanted to show you that still in the southeast, we are looking at the potential for some severe weather. We do have a tornado watch. That is in your pink. That's where you see that pink line on there. And we're watching those strong storms right now. We've had tornado warnings in and out, and that's going to be the trend throughout the night. Then as we zoom further to the north, even in the Ohio Valley, where you typically don't see these storms, this time of year, we are looking at some severe weather as well. So your yellow is your severe storm watch, and then your pink is your tornado watch. Also seeing some severe storm warnings. We saw some tornado warnings as well. They continue to go in and out in this area as well too. So here's the overall picture from Severe Prediction Center for this evening. It's a huge swath. We're looking from the southeast all the way through the Ohio Valley, where you see that yellow. That's where we're expecting the severe weather. And quite frankly, that's where we're seeing the severe weather right now. So 23 million at risk. That includes hail, that includes damaging winds, and that includes a chance for tornadoes. And still on Thursday, we're talking about the threat for severe weather stretching from central Florida all the way up the East Coast into the mid-Atlantic. Again, we have those threats mainly for hail and damaging winds as we're sort of going into an environment that's less favorable for tornadoes, but still we need to watch that. Rainfall forecast where we're looking at locally heavy rain in a lot of spots. Where you see those yellows and oranges, that's where we're expecting the heaviest rain. Hallie?
Michelle Grossman, thank you so much for that forecast. Appreciate it. We got word late this afternoon that Madeleine Albright, the first woman to serve as Secretary of State, has died of cancer. In just the last couple of minutes, President Biden honoring her as a force, saying hers were the hands that turned the tide of history. She first came to the United States as a refugee from Prague, later stepping into roles where she'd reached the highest levels of American government. Former President Clinton appointed her ambassador to the UN in 1993. And she served in that position until becoming U.S. Secretary of State 4 years later. At that time, she became the highest-ranking woman in the history of U.S. government. Madeleine Albright was 84 years old. When we come back, professional basketball star Brittany Griner, detained in Russia, finally gets a visit from the State Department. We just found out about this today. We're going to tell you how she's doing later in the show. Plus, the Republican congressman and former Trump loyalist who says former President Trump pushed him to rescind the 2020 election. We got the audio next. Some breaking news now. Alabama Congressman Mo Brooks accusing former President Trump of very explicitly telling him to try to rescind the 2020 election and to put him back in the White House, even saying that like a year after that election, the former president was insisting there would be another one to get him back in the Oval Office. It comes after Mr. Trump pulled his support today for the congressman's Senate campaign, saying in a statement that Congressman Brooks made, quote, a horrible mistake recently when he went woke and told voters to put the 2020 presidential election behind them. Again, a legitimate election in which President Biden was legitimately elected with no widespread voter fraud. We have to say that every time we talk about this. Vaughn Hilliard is joining us now. Vaughn, you are leading the way on coverage of this story because I think you just got off the phone with Congressman Brooks, right? What did he tell you?
Yeah, Hallie, I did just get off with the congressman. And before we play a little bit of that audio of our phone conversation there, I think it's important to set up why do we care about Mo Brooks, the congressman from Alabama? Well, he's running for the U.S. Senate and had the endorsement last year of Donald Trump. But really, there's three major contenders here. And Mo Brooks was and has been one of the staunchest defenders of the former president. On January 6th, just hours before that insurrection took place, he was at that Save America rally that Trump dubbed it. And he spoke the words, quote, "Today is the day American patriots start taking down names and kicking ass." Those were the words of Mo Brooks. Now, fast forward to today. Donald Trump has rescinded his endorsement in large part because his polling numbers have fallen. But now Mo Brooks is opening up about what the former president has asked of him in the past. Take a listen.
Did he directly tell you to fight to decertify the election, the 2020 election?
He did not use the word decertify. He used the word rescind.
Rescind. What did that mean to you?
Well, I'm a lawyer. Rescind means that you render it null and void.
Do you guys have the power to do that in Congress?
No.
And then immediately remove Joe Biden. I guess that would be through impeachment?
Through the rescission of the election results.
Now, Mo Brooks is alleging that the former president urged him to essentially try to get Joe Biden out of office, rescind, in his words, the 2020 election. And he makes quite the claim and the allegation, which you can hear later on in our conversation. Take a listen.
I explained to the president that what he asked is legally impossible and it violates the United States Constitution, and I'm not going to do it.
Did he directly say that there should be a new special election for the presidency?
In one of the conversations, he mentioned having a subsequent election for the presidency.
And this was after this Labor Day?
After September 1st of 2021.
We now have on the record, Hallie, one of President Trump's loyalists saying in late 2021, at least 9 months after President Trump had left office, that he was still trying to find a way back. And as you heard Mo Brooks say, that he told the former president directly that it was unconstitutional. Now, I did ask Mo Brooks whether he'd be open to speaking with the January 6th committee there that is really looking at the events around all of this, and he did not explicitly say no.
To be clear, and I think folks watching know this, but you can't have a presidential election, right, whenever you want to have a presidential election. Like there are times and places for those. Donald Trump lost. We know he's been upset about the fact that he's lost. Did Congressman Brooks explain in any way, Vaughn, why he waited until now, until Trump pulled back, former President Trump pulled back his endorsement to go public with these, as you say, explosive accusations here?
Right. Mo Brooks isn't going to walk back his own position that the election was stolen. He's not doing that here. But this is that fine line that I think a lot of other Republicans, Hallie, you know this, in 2022 will be looking at, is that former President Trump is willing to throw even his closest allies off the ship when they become no longer, in his eyes, necessary to his path to political prominence. And in the case of Mo Brooks, he's been falling in recent weeks in the polls, and there's a great many in Alabama that believe that he was not going to make it to the runoff election just 2 months from now, which would essentially give Donald Trump a loss among candidates who he endorses. Now, the big question is, how many others running for office are going to be willing to separate themselves from the former president? You know, so few at this point still have yet to do so, Hallie.
As we've been on the air, even, Vaughn, another statement in from former President Trump slamming not just Mo Brooks, but Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, too. Vaughn Hilliard, thank you much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, hundreds of people had to evacuate London's former Olympics Aquatic Center today because of a chlorine gas leak. You had emergency responders who treated several people there that were having breathing problems. Dozens of people were taken to the hospital. Why did this leak happen? Officials say it was some kind of chemical reaction. Number 2, a black box has been recovered from that awful China Eastern plane crash that we showed you earlier this week. The recorder is so damaged, they don't even know if it's the flight data recorder or the cockpit voice recorder. They're still looking for the second black box. Both of them are important to try to figure out what went wrong and why this plane dropped out of the sky this week. Number 3, the Supreme Court has blocked a plan for legislative districts in Wisconsin today. The state's Democratic governor drew it up. It would have created a new black majority state house district. The Republican-run legislature there opposed it. Number 4, mortgage rates are going up faster than expected. So some economists think that means that forecasts for how many homes will be put on sale should drop. The average rate of a 30-year fixed mortgage hit 4.72% yesterday. This time last year, it was around 3.45%. Number 5, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, says a whaling ship that sunk more than 200 years ago, guess what, has been at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, why do we care? Why is that a big deal? NOAA says it gives a glimpse into a time when descendants of slaves and Native Americans served as essential crew and mariners in the whaling industry. So really historically significant. You know, scientists are going to want to get a closer look at that. Still to come, babies and kids under 5 are a little bit closer tonight to getting protected against COVID. We'll talk about when Moderna's vaccine might be available coming up. Plus, the bird flu is spreading fast among chickens. It may mean your food prices could go up even more. We'll explain why coming up. Not too long ago, Dr. Anthony Fauci is saying the data from Moderna's vaccine trial for young kids looks promising. That's after the company announced today that its COVID vaccine does well in kids 6 months to 6 years old. Moderna says the antibody response was kind of similar to what you would see in a clinical trial of adults. But the shots were only up to 43% effective at preventing infection from Omicron in these kids. So if you're looking at these numbers and you're like, well, wait a second, these numbers seem kind of low. Moderna's vice president says the trial was successful because, listen, 43% is higher than 0. It's better than nothing. The company now plans to ask the FDA to authorize this vaccine. I want to bring in Meg Terrell. So, Meg, I think people are looking at this. Can I tell you, as a mom of a kid under the age of 5, I've been doing some reporting on this for a story that'll air actually on this show next week. And I've been talking to parents who are really frustrated that there's not more to be done. There's not more help coming for their kids who are not able to get the vaccine right now because they're still too young. This feels like it's promising news, but give me the gut check here. Is it, or do we need to know more?
Well, we need to see what the FDA is going to do with this, but on its face, it does seem like promising news. Moderna says that with 2 doses, this study met its goal, which was showing that similar immune response in these kids ages 6 months to just under 6 years, with a quarter of the dose, as you would see in young adults ages 18 to 25 with the full adult dose. So they met the goals of the trial. The other main goal, of course, is safety, and fevers is something they looked at really closely here, because that's why Pfizer actually went down down to such a low dose. You don't want to cause high fevers in such young kids. And they said here the tolerability looked similar to what you would see with other pediatric vaccines. So based on that, they're filing with the FDA. But because they didn't hit that 50% efficacy threshold, we're going to have to see what the FDA does with this.
When are we going to find out? In other words, what is the timeline for when we're going to hear more from the FDA and for when potentially, given this news today, you could see shots in like babies and toddlers' arms?
Yeah, so Moderna says within the coming weeks they're going to file, so we'll wait to see when they've announced that they've done that, and then we'll see how quickly the FDA plans to review this. The other kind of wild card here is, of course, we're waiting for Pfizer's data on the third dose of its regimen after that whole roller coaster. We're expecting that in April, so it'll be really interesting to see if the FDA kind of wants to look at these together and be able to potentially give parents and pediatricians the ability to choose which one might look better for their kid. We'll just have to see what those data look like and then how quickly they're aiming to review each of these individually or together.
Meg Terrell, I know you're in that COVID briefing today. Glad to have you with us and bringing us your reporting. Thank you. Any day now, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis could sign what opponents call the Don't Say Gay bill, even after protests that included a walkout by Disney workers. But even with this controversy, he's not shying away from issues related to the LGBTQ+ community. He's now saying that Florida native Emma Wyan of the University of Virginia is the winner of last week's NCAA swimming championship. She actually came in second after transgender athlete Leah Thomas won first place. The bill DeSantis appears ready to sign bans teachers from talking with young students about sexual orientation or gender identity, or asks them to do so in an age-appropriate way. Some teachers and parents are getting more and more vocal about how they feel caught in the middle of this political fight. Our Kate Snow went to one county in Florida where parents are really divided on this. And in this election year, they're actually getting organized to do something about it. Kate is joining us now, of course. And Kate, this feels like an explosive issue in that community, but it's one of a lot of things that has taken on, a political color in Florida. You went to a school board meeting yourself, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, Hallie. When we first started setting up this story, we didn't even really know about the so-called Don't Say Gay bill yet. That wasn't even on the radar. We were going there because Brevard County is a place where, you've seen a lot of viral videos of people speaking up at school board meetings, yelling at each other. At one point last fall, they even had to clear the room because people were so into it and parents were being so vocal and angry at each other. The chairwoman was worried that people might hit each other. So I sat down with the chair. We went to a board meeting, as you said, and we saw a lot. We saw a lot of debate that night about books and whether some books should be eliminated from school libraries over concerns about appropriateness. I talked to the chairwoman of the board, who's been on the board for 8 years. She said she's never seen anything like this. Take a listen. You had a meeting in October where you had to literally kick everybody out.
We are going to clear the room.
No. Yeah.
We did. The audience started to get very loud, and it was reaching the point of being unsafe.
Belford is worried about the impact on teachers and administrators.
I'm blessed to be serving a group of 9,000 people that wake up every single day and pour their heart and soul. Sorry.
What upsets you?
Our people are getting beat up. And there is no more noble job, and you won't find a group more committed to our kids. And they are fallout in all of this, unfortunately.
So, Hallie, that gives you a sense for some of what people are feeling down there. This is a really active community. Again, one of many in this country where that's happening, Hallie.
And these aren't just a couple of parents walking into a school board meeting. These are organized groups, right, Kate?
Yeah, and so one group that was formed in Brevard County, you may have heard of them now because they're now in 34 states. They're called Moms for Liberty, founded by a woman who used to serve on that Brevard County school board and was actually ousted in the last election, and then went on to found this very conservative moms group. On the other side, you've got a group called Families for Safe Schools that organized in response to Moms for Liberty. They're a more left-leaning group. It's interesting, though, Hallie, Moms for Liberty is, as I said, now all over the country, and they have an operating budget, annual budget of about almost $500,000 a year. On the other hand, the left-leaning group, Families for Safe Schools, I asked the leader of that group in Brevard County how much money they have. He said our budget is zero, and they have not expanded beyond Brevard County.
Kate Snow. Kate, thank you for bringing us that story and that reporting. We appreciate it. And you can actually watch more of Kate's story tomorrow night right here on NBC News Now on Meet the Press Reports Classroom Culture Wars. That's 10:30 Eastern on whatever you're watching now, however you're watching. Still to come. The 26-year-old woman accused of shoving an 87-year-old to her death has been arrested. And police say their suspects stuck around after the crime before trying to cover her tracks. We've got that story. Plus, the founder of a megachurch that brought in stars from Kyrie Irving to Justin Bieber is out after yet another scandal in a church that's been plagued by them. We've got those details coming up. One of the world's biggest evangelical churches is dealing with another scandal, this time involving one of its founders. We're going to get into that in a couple of minutes. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Midwest bureau, more and more cases of bird flu are popping up in Nebraska. It's been confirmed, the virus in a huge chicken farm. And now more than 500,000 birds will be euthanized. In total, more than 12.5 million chickens have been killed across 8 states to try to hold off more spread of this bird flu. Experts say this runs the risk of hiking up prices of poultry and eggs. Some of that is already up because of inflation, too. From our Northeast Bureau, we're learning more about the woman accused of shoving an 87-year-old woman in New York City, which led to her death. Prosecutors say Lauren Pazienza quit her job, hid at her parents' house, and then deleted her wedding website and social media after allegedly shoving Barbara Gustern, an elderly singing coach, to the ground. She's been charged with manslaughter and assault. From our West Coast Bureau, teachers in Sacramento went on strike today after the district and unions did not come to a deal. So that means all schools are closed. Clubs, other activities are canceled. This affects something like 43,000 students. Teachers there want better benefits and for the school to hire more people since they're dealing with a staff shortage. So we've been talking about what's been going on with WNBA star Brittany Griner, who's been detained in Russia. And now today, finally, the State Department says it has been given access to her. Spokesperson Ned Price today saying she's doing pretty well given the circumstances. Watch.
She is doing as well as can be expected under these very difficult circumstances. We'll continue to work very closely with her legal team, with her broader network, to see to it that she is treated fairly and that her rights are respected.
He also said the U.S. wants consistent and timely visits, in his words, moving forward. Remember, we found out on February 21st from Russian officials that she'd been detained, arrested, they say, after they found cannabis oil in her luggage at a Moscow airport when she flew in from New York. We haven't heard from Griner's family yet. They've previously asked for their privacy to be respected. Katie Beck is joining me now to talk about this. And Katie, what's so interesting here is that the embassy in Moscow was repeatedly, they said, denied this, what they call consular access, the ability to go in and speak to Griner until just 24 hours ago. What changed?
We actually don't know exactly what changed, Hallie, and we don't know if this is a permanent change or this was just sort of a temporary sighting. State Department officials are saying, we hope this is going to continue. We hope we're going to be able to have continued access to her. And per international law, we should be able to see her and communicate with her. But they don't know if this is going to be something that sticks. You know, she has been in detention since February 17th. That's a long time. And up until this point, the communications and the information that we have received has all been through a Russian lawyer communicating with her spokespeople and her family and her camp here. So it has not come directly from the State Department. They have kept kind of a vague stance on this whole thing, you know, saying that they are advocating for her and as they advocate for every American, but also saying that they are certainly in violation of international law, which requires them to have that access.
Some of this is strategic silence, I think you could call it, Katie, right? And not wanting to get too public or talk too much about it for fear that that may actually endanger Griner further here, which means, you know, what little we've heard is from friends and family who have, I think, talked about how scary this has been.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, a lot of things are in play here. The big question is, will her detention be used as some kind of leverage in a political fight? Obviously, escalating tensions with Russia are on the table. We're watching what's going on there, and we're wondering, this is a very, very serious charge she's facing. This is a criminal investigation that could carry up to 10 years in a Russian prison. Does the crime really fit the punishment? Is she really being fairly treated? Or is this going to be used for some type of exchange down the road as these tensions escalate? Is she, you know, some type of bargaining chip? And that is yet to be seen.
One of the things, too, that people might wonder is, okay, well, why was Brittany Griner in Russia? It's actually not that unusual, right? When you look at basketball players and what they can earn overseas, specifically in the WNBA, versus what they can earn at home, we're seeing it on the screen. I mean, it's nearly 4 times the base salary overseas versus here at home.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, certainly very common for the women. I mean, the top players can make $1 million this season. That's 4 times their normal salary in the WNBA. We know that Griner had been doing it for 8 seasons. She had been going over to Russia to play. And a lot of these females players do that. They go to Europe, they go to Tokyo, they go to Russia. They can obviously increase their earnings and exposure and still stay in shape. So this was not something out of the ordinary for her routine, and it's certainly not out of the ordinary for female basketball players in general.
Katie Beck, staying on top of this story for us. Katie, thank you. I imagine we may hear more about Griner's situation in the coming weeks. Appreciate it. A megachurch known around the world for bringing in celebrities like Justin Bieber, even a Kardashian, is facing another scandal today. The board of Hillsong Church says its leader and co-founder, Brian Houston, has resigned after acting inappropriately toward 2 people. The church said Houston sent unacceptable text messages, their words, to a staff member, and was in the hotel room of another woman who was also involved with the church after an event, which they found violated the code of conduct. Houston is already fighting allegations he covered up sex abuse by his father in the 1970s. And this whole thing comes after the firing of another high-profile pastor, Carl Lentz, who worked in New York's Hillsong Church before he was fired after they learned he'd had extramarital affairs. Houston hasn't spoken since his resignation was announced, but last year he told the Today Show he was committed to cleaning up the church's problems.
In my mind, if one person is treated badly, that's one too many. If it's true that people have been treated badly or that people have been bullied, I am 100% committed to moving that out of our church.
Kathy Park is joining me now with some of these details. So, Kathy, you know, Houston was already on leave over these allegations that he knew his father was hiding, you know, abuse, basically. Was it expected that he would resign here, or is this coming as a surprise?
Well, Hallie, I think for a lot of people, it's not a surprise that he resigned, right? So he was cloaked in controversy, as you mentioned, tied to his father. But after further investigation by the church board, they uncovered, obviously, that he broke the church code of conduct on more than one occasion over the span of 10 years. The first happened in 2013 when he sent an inappropriate text message to a woman. And then another incident happened not too long ago in 2019 when he allegedly walked into a woman's hotel room at an event. And apparently, according to a statement that was released by the church, he was on anti-anxiety medications and also mixed that with alcohol. So obviously, these controversies, these scandals came to a head, and then his resignation.
Hillsong's board, you mentioned a statement, released this statement saying they were grateful for Houston and his wife's part in building the church and asked supporters to pray for them. Talk about where this goes from here, particularly given some of what we laid out in the introduction, right? That this church has faced its share of scandals before.
So that is a great question. So the head of church right now is Phil Dooley, and he is doing a whole lot of damage control right now. He has come out publicly apologizing for the actions of Houston. But looking ahead right now, this is a scandal that has really embroiled this mega church, Hallie. You might remember this is a church that really exploded in size ever since it was founded by Houston back in 1983. And we're actually here in central London right now in front of the Dominion Theatre, and they have a footprint here as well. We looked on the website. They meet here on a weekly basis, and they have the capacity to fill up to 2,000 seats. But moving forward, the church says they will be looking at just kind of how they do things moving ahead as far as the procedures and the structure goes. But obviously, this is a stain on this mega church that so many people know about. Hallie?
Kathy Park, live for us there in London with that story. Kathy, thank you so much. And thank you all, as always, for joining us for this hour. It's been a busy week here on NBC News Now. We got more ahead for you tomorrow. Same time, same place. We're really glad you're with us. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.